Welcome back to Side Quests IX,
Mm,
episode 4. Back with me, my perennial party member and constant companion, Wes Schantz. Wes, how are you doing?
doing okay. It's been a minute, but we're doing okay. How about you?
My own fault. We did not get to broadcast from Morocco, mostly because the conference I was at when I was there was a more than dawn to dusk sort of affair. There were not a lot of moments to get to just do something. And the moments that I think would have worked for me would have been pretty early in the morning for you, like 1 or 2 a.m. because of the difference in time. And so sorry to the listeners for not giving our usual international content like we did
Yeah.
Oxford, or our travel content like we did in Great Barrington as well. But I the next place I go, we'll see what we can do. And same with Wes. Same with Wes. Uh,
When I travel again someday, maybe. Yeah. Well, okay, so you did have a lot of time to play though, with those long flights,
that's
and
right.
you got way ahead of me for a while there. I'm slowly catching up, but I am only as far as that place where I mentioned the other night. I released the Moogle who's under the bell, and I guess he released himself. I didn't really remember how that went, but it was pretty funny. And then saved it after that in the next room with him and his newlywed. And then I played like for 5 minutes like the next night or the night after, went up the little vine and climbed up onto the plateau and was immediately like destroyed by a giant dragon that lives up there. Uh, it was really scary and it killed, I think it just killed Queena. But I was like, nah, I'm just gonna reset and do it again so I don't have to have that loss of a phoenix down to bring them back. He, she. Uh, so I'm there. I'm about to fight Gizmaluk and make it through the cave of what's the city called? Burmecia, right? Is the next part of the continent, the third part of the continent, which I haven't been to yet. And I think you're a little further than that, right? Are you off the continent?
I'm not off the continent, but I have just found um the location. I am to the entrance to the outer continent,
Cool.
or where Kuja supposedly has his origin. And I've also done quite a bit of reading on Final Fantasy IX too, so I'm pretty
Ooh.
up to it with it. But like you suggested while messaging, because in some ways I've upset the aesthetic of the playthrough experience, you can do more concentrated sessions on themes, and you laid out certain locations starting with Dali.
Mm,
Dali, which has this really interesting name. One thing I want to say is that now that I've done a little reading on Final Fantasy IX, it really is bearing out a lot of the things that we say just in our first reader response. So I think our reader slash player response has been
mm,
has been good. I would also say that Final Fantasy IX is the first Final Fantasy that took a long time for me to really play my way into.
mm.
It does get very deep. All of a sudden, characters that are ridiculous looking, like Steiner or Vivi, are all of a sudden showing major depths and having to really deal with difficult questions and are experiencing self-transformation. And we'll get into that. I
Hmm.
don't think that's there, we're there yet. But one thing I think I can say without being too much of a spoiler or spoil sport is that this is much more of a slow burn sort of game.
Yeah.
And so it is a very different experience in that way, even though again it's supposed to be a throwback experience. It is, I think, much less like an alcoholic or espresso shot straight to the head, as it were, like Final Fantasy 7 and 8, and
Yeah.
far more like something that is a creeper, or like comes the pleasure comes with time. It's more of a
Hmm.
sipping drink, I guess I might say, with it. That
Yeah.
said, in this first city or this first town of Dali, which has this interesting name. One wonders whether it's a localization issue or whether it is supposed to sound like Salvador Dali's name. But this is a place that has a secret underground facility that is making mass-produced black mages. And so we have, though a throwback to sort of these absolutist monarchies, and as is I'm starting to see somewhat usual with Final Fantasies, there being like three continents slash three major kingdoms. Um, there is evidence here of some sort of criticism of either socialism or capitalism, depending on how one sees the nature of factory mass production. And
Okay.
and let's say it's capitalism, just for the moment. There seems to be some question of can something with a soul be made that is mass produced, which itself strikes me as the great question about the aesthetic and artistic value of a video game.
Yeah.
There is this capitalist concern, this the same in the music industry as well as the movie industry and also the book industry. Um, but can something that is made um, on an assembly line, as it were, or made to be mass produced, can it be imbued with a soul? And the more specific question, the non sort of allegorical question is, how did this specific iteration, Vivi, which is
Yeah.
the Final Fantasy IX Legend of, says that Vivi's name is the infinitive to live. That's incorrect, of course. It is
Not quite. Yeah. It's close.
perfect. It's importantly the first person. I would say, even though again localization issues, the name can be switched, but even so, that's not correct. Like the whole Liberi Fatalis issue there.
It's
Um,
close. It's close. They're trying.
they tried. No, again, very very close. But so I think we see here in this town the question of what is a video game? Can a video game be more than just an object sold in this larger world system? And Vivi, not in some ways our protagonist, right? We did have control over him, I think, prior to Zidane. And so our actual temporal protagonist or around that, didn't we have him and then Zidane? I'm fairly certain that we did. Uh,
No, it's the other way around, I think.
is it?
Yeah. Yeah. It cuts to Vivi and after you've done the battle. Yeah. You don't do much with Zidane is the thing. You can't really explore. You just fight a battle essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Deuteragonist, at least. So,
Deuteragonist. Good. Yeah.
interestingly, he is the first one to have identity issues
Hmm.
and to confront the absolute this finitude of his existence. And I say finitude in the sort of limiting aspect of that. It's as if the nature and scope of his existence has been predefined. But we know from the nature of his grandfather, who was not a black mage, as it turns out, but was a coup, like Quina, who in the literature, this is very interesting. So people make a big stink about the fact that Adele is she, but Quina is they,
Yeah.
because who are genderless. And so genderless creatures are now given the pronouns they and them by default. And since that was not something considered in 2000, that is how people who were scholars of Final Fantasy IX refer to what Queen and his people are.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so Vivi's, even more complicating Vivi's identity,
Yeah.
because Vivi too seems to be genderless, and certainly not the sort of creature that would have a natural reproduction, given that he was first or they were first. Though I think he is actually referred to as he.
Yeah.
on an assembly line. Um, and so how did Vivi attain consciousness?
Yes,
Or is Vivi not conscious is one of those sort of strange questions that I think a conscious being can ask, like, am I real? But
exactly.
that question itself is a pretty good litmus test.
Yeah,
Um, but um, but like you hinted at last time, and I had not recalled, there this this locale hints at and literally has depths unforeseen.
there you go. There you go. Yeah. So as far as the name Dali, that aspect of the town seems to be the closest thing. I mean, there is a windmill, so a little bit Spanish inflected, right? You got our windmill. Um, there's something weird about the town, although it seems very idyllic. Um, the mayor won't really let anyone come in and talk to him. He kicks you out, he shoos you out every time you try to go in there. It looks like there's someone sleeping on the couch in his house. Maybe they're sick, maybe they're, I don't know, in some kind of trance state or something. I don't know. That's a mystery that we don't solve on our visit, which I found perplexing. Because I was like, wait, I didn't like do everything that there is to do here. There's a treasure box that I can see, but I can't get to because the windmill's still going. Like, oh man. But the mystery that we do manage to more or less suss out is where is everybody, right? There's kids running around. There's kids minding the shops, um, except for the inn. And there's like a whole subplot there about like the innkeeper is like the one person in town who didn't want to go along with the scheme to like, yeah, like you said, capitalistic, make a bunch of money doing this factory work. He has maybe a different vision or politics or something. But he seems kind of like a coward because he's kind of capitulating to them once our party comes to town, and he's like, "Oh, this is my chance to like, you know, scoop something here," and he keeps pretending to be asleep. Um, the kids think that Vivi is one of the mages from below and like capture him and chuck him down there, which is really sad. Again, Vivi just
Crying,
doesn't get along well with other kids. You know, there was first the rat kid, Puck, now these kids and Dali.
very
Um,
mats off, like that one kid who bites Alyosha's finger.
yes, yes, Ilyushka. Uh, a little bit, yeah. And I mean, the kids, I think they're probably, um, suffering from the lack of parents. That can't be an easy thing, which I think is just basically a reality for um, for all of the orphans of all of literature, right? Like that's pretty much a trope throughout all different genres. But particularly when you get to like the young adult or the even the fairy tale, right? That stands behind it. So yeah, there's something weird about this town. I love that you make the connection between like what's going on there and the game itself in some way. And that reminds me that Uematsu, the composer, has a rock band
Hmm.
that is called the Black Mages, right? So he like performs, um, which I think, if he identifies himself in some way with the Black Mages, then makes sense that we might identify the series in some way with the form of Black Mages that we're getting here. This creation of they're sort of smushed in a big machine that's powered by mist in some way, right? So this is like one of the discoveries we make down there is that there's a room that you can go in, you can choose not to go in, but if you do go in, it sort of like releases a bunch of mist and then monsters start to appear. And they're pretty tough. So it's like, curiosity killed the cat a little bit there. Um, but it does like sort of drive home something that you probably could have told, been able to tell without that, which is again, this power of mist uh, is used for the machinery and like the composition of these beings in some way. And that's a question I think that, goes back to Final Fantasy VII, where it was like the life stream, right? I think there's a parallel to be seen there in some regard. And very much, the creation of a being, right? A super soldier or be it a weapon like refined out of the planet itself, or whatever it is. There's all sorts of different kind of angles on that basic idea of like, yeah, the question of where does life come from? Where does the soul come from? How does it progress? How does it transmigrate, perhaps? These are things that these games are really interested in. And as a series, they sort of represent this transmigration of soul, right? From iteration to iteration. Each one is bounded in itself, and yet it opens onto the inevitable succession of the sorceress, if you like, right? The inevitable next Final Fantasy. As long as they keep being profitable, we're going to keep getting them, right, in some form. And it's interesting. Like the town is very small. There's not that much in terms of screens and exploration, but I do feel like we see a lot of character development happen here. Our party splits up again, right? And so we're sort of following Zidane mainly, but we have these little active time components where we can jump in and see what other characters are doing. And we see that they are divided, right? They really are um, quite different from one another. They're not unified in the way that a party traditionally is. And in that regard, it reminds me of like in Seven, when we get to the first town outside Midgar, our party splits up and one of them is telling a story to the others, right? And this idea of like storytelling, um, and the memory that that evokes. I think that something similar is happening here where we have this kind of like split of the party where, Steiner wants to do one thing, Garnett is worried about this other thing with her mother, quote unquote, the queen. Vivi, obviously, he's just like, wow, that's a windmill. That's cool. I've got captured by these kids, right? I'm crying in the barrel. And then Zidane is kind of like, well, what do I do? Do I have a chance with this princess or not? I'm not sure. I think we also hear her singing for the first time, which is like a little detail that's going to become important. It's the first kind of glimpse of that. I'm sure there's lots of other little kind of fun details and things that are happening as you explore. Like Zidane notices some books. I'm just looking through some of these screenshots. He's like, "Oh, these books suck. They're all about like making money quick and stuff." Oh, I love that. And oh yeah, so we've got some Moogle letters going back and forth. We can sort of observe. Um, I think uniquely in this case, we can observe a little scene almost from the Moogle or the cat's perspective. So it's not like just our characters, right? Oh, that's right. We do see the Moogles like telling us how to do things in the swamp too. So yeah. Anyway, it suggests like whatever is going on with the storytelling of this game, it is definitely multi-perspective. Now, I don't know if that's going to tend to like suggest some sort of unreliable narrator the way we get in Seven. I think quite the contrary, actually. I think we are sort of the most privileged in that we see like all of the little components and we can sort of uh, figure out how they fit together. Um, but yeah, oh, of course. Garnett has just changed her name, right? So her personal transformation is also notable here. Like she's having this little moment where she's like practicing talking to the shopkeeper, I think,
Yes.
like trying to like blend in better. But in the very act of doing that, like so kind of artificially, she's almost drawing more attention to herself. So maybe it'll pay off in the long run because she's like getting better at it. But in the moment, it's like yeah, you're not fooling anyone. Like we know you're the princess. um, yeah, yeah. So it's good. It's some good character development, some good like world building. This is the stuff that I was like, missing in eight, frankly. And I just it's catnip to me. I love this stuff.
That's fantastic. So yeah, I want to touch on a couple of the major themes that you just touched on, which are the re two of so one is a meta theme, which is the reiteration of themes across the Final Fantasies and the attempt to like Groundhog Day to get it right, to get closer to the essence. Maybe
Yeah.
that's my hypothesis for them. They're constantly trying to get at something better and better, and
Mhm.
perhaps as there are more, they can be more specific and try and get at something more particular or specific with each iteration. But I think that they do hit on certain themes like the acceptance of mortality being
Mhm.
one, the acceptance of the limitation of individualism, and the adding something to a team, but also being on a team, and that ultimately being something that's positive. But you touch on two themes that I think come in here slightly disguised, but are also quite prominent in 7 and 8, which are the presence of war taking loved ones away. So Final Fantasy 7, obviously the war at Wu Tai took Sephiroth away, whom we all love. No, I'm just kidding. That didn't actually take him away either. But uh, the Wu Tai War had taken away many adult men, and I don't know if we find out what happened to Cloud's dad, but ostensibly something like that.
Hmm.
He is one of those many men who has just gone from that world. Final Fantasy VIII, obviously the Sorceress World War. There are all
Hmm.
these kids and orphans, and then Final Fantasy 9, we have here a city of children, and
Yeah.
whether that's because work is far away or because there was war, those are two different potential reasons. One being more like economic capitalism, and one being more there was war, which can be because of capitalist reasons or and certainly because of economic reasons, but it isn't necessarily so. But this is again a theme that gets, I think, hammered on by Final Fantasy as the cost of a generation growing up without, or with a sort of cold generation raising it. Lack with many a generation marked by absence, a
Yeah.
ghostly, like a Stephen Dedalus ghostly absence, sort of
Yeah.
Hamlet definition. The other one is, I think you really nail it when you say the mist is very like the life stream.
Mhm.
We haven't gotten to the Aoife tree yet, and Terra and Gaia, which are just the same word in ancient Greek and in Latin for the same thing. Um, but uh, but it will turn out that this mist stuff is something like the soul of the world, or the
Yeah.
collective body of the souls of the world, like how the life stream is the exact same thing in Final Fantasy VII, with materia then being a crystallized form of that, and Mako being the extracted synthetic form that can be converted into energy of that crystalline soul of the world.
Yeah.
And so, if whatever, so so even more Shinra like, that rather than creating monsters and there is no Genova equivalent here, rather than creating sort of monsters by infusing these things with Mako, we have in a mass-produced way in these reactors, right? Which is again one of these like either like Soviet socialist or like late stage capitalist representations, again depending on what one like senses when one looks at the factory. But again, I would imagine more capitalist with Shinra's nature.
Mhm.
There is a use of what was once a sort of human or living soul to now create a sort of Frankensteinian, um, mass produced, uh, non-individuated or de-individuated thing in its place, which I think also is sort of an inversion of the original question of what is a video game? Like,
Yeah.
is it taking all of these artistic things, like these myths and these stories, and then just again turning it into this soulless box that gets sold for 49.99?
I feel like the question is sharpened by the distinction that we see between Vivi and the other mages, right? So maybe it's less that Final Fantasy is like those mages. Maybe it's more that they're like Vivi, right? They're one of these things that somehow miraculously acquired soul, by some mysterious process. And and they're unlike, although they resemble, they're profoundly, essentially unlike others of the genre of the, whatever, game that might be. I think that's unfair because I think if you look closely enough at any of these games, you'll find some good stuff. But but I think, the problem, the qualifier there is like there's a billion of these games out there, and each of them is the same, but each of the experiences of the player engaging with it is distinct, right? As distinct as we are. And so again, there's this kind of other layer of, so maybe Vivi was like them, but because of his relationship with the grandfather that we kind of are learning a little bit about, he was differentiated. He was able to start this process that he's continuing with our party now and all of the things they're going through. Because they're very supportive of him, right? Like already Zidane kind of had an inkling here, and he didn't tell Vivi. He was protecting him. That's kind of our theory. And now it's like confirmed. Uh, there's at least, you know, two others. We fight them in quick succession here of those like powered up ones that have been produced. Um, and Vivi cannot be protected from the realization that he is in some way like these, and maybe more like those ones, right? Because they have speech, they appear to have some kind of agency at least, um, more like them than the little puppet guys. Um, but the little puppet guys, they rise up. I really love this sequence where Steiner is trying to find a way back to Alexandria still, and he finds out that there's this like cargo airship coming, and so his plan is to get the others on board this airship. Um, they pop up from underground in a barrel, right? And he's like trying to convince them, yeah, this one, um, this is going to Lindblom, right? But they are not deceived. They, you know, do some battling against one of the black waltzes. Um, they commandeer the ship, um, and they turn it around so that it's going to Lindblom, in fact, right? So that's like our next destination. Um, there's kind of more shenanigans here. I think a pretty important scene actually, where Zidane like runs into Garnet as they're climbing up the ladder. And this is something that you could easily just kind of pass over. Um, but there's like a latent, perviness about Zidane that is like really kind of thrust into your face in this moment. Uh, where, and he does this too with Vivi, like he's constantly trying to kind of egg Vivi on to be more of like a man, like be more interested in girls and stuff. And I think that starts in Dali as well, but it's something that we see more. He's really kind of, I think it's easy to see this as like Zidane projecting his own like fascination with Dagger in particular, right, Garnet, but with girls in general, onto his little protege, Master Vivi, right? And so there's some more like sort of back and forth. They're like trying to wrap their heads around what this means, that like um, this ship was going to be carrying this cargo to Alexandria. Is there some connection there, right? Is that the source of this plan, whatever's going on? It seems that way. It seems like Garnet has her suspicions as well. And so this is kind of Steiner's transformation moment where he has to like, you know, acknowledge that his loyalty to Alexandria may in fact be misplaced, right? They might not be the noble and upstanding, you know, kingdom that he thought he was serving. Um, so it's there's this kind of like cascading effect, I guess. I think it's most obvious with Vivi, but I think each of the characters here is having to have some pretty significant, um, you know, moments of realization. Um, Vivi, it's dramatized with like him going into a trance in the battle with the next Black Waltz, and all of the other little puppet-like black mages sort of try to protect our party here, and they try to um, you know show like solidarity against this sort of most aggressive, most out there version of themselves. Um, and Yeah, it's wild because then they all start being knocked off, falling off the ship. It's pretty tragic actually, as Vivi is like watching this horrified. Um, yeah, so there's quite a few cutscene sequences there as well that are really remarkably well done, I would say.
Yeah, you're making me want to touch on several things that I hope I don't forget, but I do have notes on here. One thing I was going to say is one character that doesn't seem to have to go through any transformation is Quina. But,
Yeah.
but I'm going to check that and argue against myself and say that the nature of Quina to constantly be trying new foods is itself transformative, but also as the blue mage who
Yeah.
is eating in order to acquire new abilities is transforming all the way, all along. And so if Quina doesn't seem to have any major transformations, that might be because Quina is living life as revelation.
That's
Who
right.
once tried to live life as travel? Uh,
Indeed.
but I also wanted to mention that the presence of the black waltzes who say, and one in particular says that he's not some lowly, not scrub, but that's the language I'll use to describe
That's
uh,
right.
shows the power of self-determination in this world. There are two or three things that one can immediately deduce from the presence of these mages, and one of them is this: that even those that are created to be stronger do not have to be strong. Even those who are given a purpose, like to kill, we see one of the waltzes sort of struggling with that. He doesn't ever not try to kill us, but he's just like repeating it over and over. He becomes more demented, seemingly, because of his unwillingness to face this truth. And so this shows us that, well, Vivi is probably mass produced, but it's totally different from all the other creatures like him, is also of a strength and ability level far surpassing those like him who don't have the same sort of experiences or decisions or have made the decisions that he's made. And so I want to contrast Final Fantasy 8 and 9 in this way. Even though in Final Fantasy 8 certain jobs are suggested by stat boosts and things like that, one has pure self-determination over how to junction characters and can
Right.
make them sort of unilaterally. In this game, however, the even though the characters are sort of put into their are fixed in their roles in terms of their jobs, um, um, it is they are differentiated not by their jobs or even like their personal rank, but by the decisions they make. And so we see
Yeah.
this by Vivi being so different from those creatures created by him. We see this reiterating the point that you made about Garnet becoming Dagger. She goes from
Mhm.
princess to commoner and now speaks as a commoner, so she's transformed in this way. Oh yes, and this is the point that I was going to make. But even though there's all that freedom, that seeming freedom in Final Fantasy VIII, they are going to be totally crushed into this recursive circular
Mhm.
time warp in some way, and Squall is going to be forced into being a hero even though he doesn't want to.
That's
In
right.
this game, even though you're forced to be a creature of diminishing more, of very limited mortality, whether you are Vivi or Zidane, or ultimately, I think us, you are determined much more by your decisions.
Mm.
That is something that I think already comes through stronger. And that does dovetail nicely into my second point, which is that I think this game has a very powerful way of uh, hitting at home the nature of mortality with us. Obviously, six has the world of ruin and people die, and there's a suicide attempt. Seven, there's a death. Six, there's General Leo dies too, right? And he's this amazing guy.
Pretty amazing.
Seven, Aerith. Eight, um, well, Rain, but there's just a way, a lot of people have died in eight.
Yeah.
But in nine, rather than there just being somebody who dies, and I think at some point we will in fact actually have to experience very sad death. So
Hmm.
buckle up. But like the first character to realize that he has a really limited time horizon is Vivi.
Hmm.
There will be another two characters at least that have to go through the same sort of realization. And then I think ultimately the story being conveyed is that just like Friedrich Nietzsche says, don't cry for the people on the stage, cry for yourself.
Hmm.
It's not poor Vivi, it's not poor X, it's not poor Y, it's poor you. You were created with limited time and perhaps are sort of mass created in some ways. Obviously not by some corporation. There's an organ, you're organic. So you're not like a replicant. So you don't have to deal with those additional questions of artificiality. But um, but if you're not famous, aren't you just sort of mass produced? Um, uh, as it
Yeah.
as it were. And so that's something I think is also interesting about Zidane. He's really into girls, right? That's funny because
Yeah.
that suggests that he's interested in reproduction. And
Hmm.
that's a very interesting thing for him to be interested in. While it makes a lot of sense that Vivi would not be that interested in it. Vivi cannot partake of it. Zidane's got this strange monkey tail, so we don't really know what's going on with that. In Dragon Ball Z, that did not keep Goku from breeding with his human wife.
That's right.
But Zidane, I think we're going to have to inquire deeper into what he is because he might be the sort of thing that does have trouble reproducing on its own. Maybe not, but I would like to put a pin in that question, whether possibly he's so into girls um, because he is a creature that does not understand the nature of reproduction. That might just be all guys for our lady listeners. But I know also there's a more prosaic answer to that, which is that he was modeled to be more carefree after having Squall and Cloud, who
Hmm.
arms their respective names, um, and that he was made to be more like Irving. And so when he's more like it's funny that he comes off as a creep in today's age. I think he would have come off more as a guy who thought he was a ladies' man
Exactly.
at that time. And it wouldn't have been quite as cringe or ick inducing, a little bit so, but like in a way where you're like, I don't know, where the effect of the character would have been different at the time when he was first deployed. He's a creature of his time.
I
Um,
th I think also culturally there's something probably to be said there where like his heart is in the right place. He has this kind of innocence and gaiety in a lot of ways.
he has
And
got
so these kind of things, they're much more, I think, being intended to be played for laughs. Um, and like within this kind of storytelling, this is the kind of thing that happens, say, yeah, in Dragon Ball, in Toriyama's other great output with Dragon Quest. Um, there's tons of these kinds of jokes, and they're all over, anime, JRPGs, all the above.
but
So yeah.
I mean, yes, so the larger point being, and I think this is a beautiful point about the game that the game is making. I don't know that I would make it quite as strongly as I think it is making, is that basically you can't be given your soul by any creator, regardless of whether your creator is a world, a godlike artificial being, a less godlike artificial being, using real souls. Like there are going to be some sticky questions of what makes one. Well, there are going to be all sorts of ways to be alive, all sorts of natures of being in this, but the answer to the question of what is your soul is choice here. The soul, the essence of a soul is choice. And when social rank, princess, commoner, head of thief, all of this stuff can be upset and will be upset. Um, who is Braun, who is Kuja, who is Dagger? Not only are these people's roles going to change and be shown to be mutable, but they will themselves show that they occupy differing identities from the ones that we initially suspect. Dagger will be a different race from what we think she is. Same with Zidane and with Kuja. And I mean the game will we have no clue like how deep it's going to go and how different these characters will be. But one thing that I think will stay consistent is that the choices of the characters define them.
Yes. Well, I think you know, you can see this pretty clearly inverted, like through the lens of Black Waltz 3. So his actual line is really interesting here. He says, as the other created mages are coming up to try to whatever they're trying to do to him, it's unclear. But apparently they're gonna, he says, "Are you protecting him?" Right? And then he says, they don't respond. He says, "Nonsense, dot, 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 nonsense. You are no different from mindless dolls. What can you do? Um,
That's
get
right.
out of my way." This is the line, right? This is the puppet line from FF7, right? And then he proceeds to destroy them and most of the ship in this very dramatic cutscene as Vivi looks on with horror through he's like grasping his head and like oh my gosh. So it's consciously it has to be consciously self-consciously echoing that line from Genova slash Sephiroth to Cloud. You're just a puppet, right? Um, and this is, I think, the great anxiety of these games, as you've placed your finger on, right? Are they just mindless entertainment? Are they some sort of protection, but ultimately very weak and easily blown apart, by the true, art or whatever it is, the true life, if you want to call it that, right? Um, just stuff coming up that like gets you really angry or passionate in other ways, or do they have that essence, that soul that they seem to be striving for? um, and I think it is the player's choice that determines the answer to that question in a kind of ontological sense and not just in a sort of like subjective, like, well, if you like games, then they have soul. But like I think that yeah, we are in some way uh, able to um, like access that because we, being informed by our grandfathers as we are, right? We have the ability to ask that question on a deeper level. And I mean, I think the ways that this game, pastiches together the various art forms is really, you know, highlighted in these moments where it's these amazing cutscenes. They're very short, but they are like of a distinctly higher quality, I think, than what most video games were able to do at that time. They really stand out, and it it makes it that much more ironic that when they go and like make a feature length film, it's such a bomb, it's such a disaster. But they have the ability, the care, the craftsmanship, the art to create animation, music, story, through dialogue. Um, individually those things they're pretty darn good, but put together with the ways in which the players interacting with them, they truly have something that's not simply reducible to the sum of those parts, right? Which I think is a fairly decent, way to define whatever we're trying to call soul here. It's something that transcends the material constitutive parts, and something about the relationship and some other, you know, addendum from outside, from beyond. Um, I will also say this is an incredibly difficult battle. Um, the the Black Waltz will not attack Garnet, and then there's like a follow-up battle, the one on the airship. She's not even in the fight. She's in the engine room, like um, I guess being protected or something. Anyway, so you don't have a healer. This is like that battle where Zidane is all alone in a way, because you are sort of without that protection that she gives, and so I think it's going to tend to raise her importance in the player's mind. Like she really is like the linchpin of your team because of her ability to heal. Because otherwise, all you have is however many potions you manage to steal or find up to this point. So especially if you're trying to like steal good items from the Black Waltz, it's a very tough battle. And then he, in one last like desperate attempt to catch you as you're going through the closing gate, he apparently blows up the little Zornthorn airship that they've been following along in, like runs into the wall and blows up, and it's awesome as your party like shoo, makes it through. It's very what is it? Millennium Falcon, from Star Wars.
Well, we're going to get an exact quote from that of like fear leading to anger, anger leading to hate, hate leading to suffering. The Phantom Menace trailer where Yoda said that was featured something like 6 months before this game came out.
Ah,
But two things you mentioned, I wanna touch on before we go here. One is that you mentioned pastiche. And I've had to read all this adaptation literature for this piece that I'm putting out that I hope we get to talk about in the next couple
yeah.
weeks. But I am actually going to be claiming that the relationship between Dante and Final Fantasy 7 and 8 is that of a pastiche.
Nice.
That I need
Got
to
it.
read do Final Fantasy 9, probably 10, and also of course this new tactics that
Mm.
are in the possession of now. I know this is and people are calling this the definitive version, but the fact that you said that is wonderful. And I am going to reframe the question. I'm going to say that the more interesting question is not what kind of adaptation these games are, but just all what is adapted in these games is the more and that is perhaps the more interesting question. Um, I was about the F&V sequences. We know from Final Fantasy 7 and 8, once Square got away from cartridges and Nintendo, they really wanted to push the boundaries of technology. And this was their last major installment on the PS1. This is their goodbye to the PS1, with a PS2 game coming out basically right after this. So I think within a year of this. And so they really wanted to showcase what they could do. And I think the polish is there, like you said. One
Yeah.
thing to counter what I said last time about the sort of formulaic nature of battles in terms of each character having their own roles, that is partially true in the beginning when one has all one's characters. But a mechanic that quickly is exposed is that we're switching in terms of there's a great term for this that's applied to James Joyce's method of literature, which has the same thing going on or different things going on at the same time. It's called like formal mode, spatial mode. It'll come to me. I can maybe drop it in the links. But in any case, that's happening here. We lose our party members, and so sometimes we have parties of one, two, three, or four. Most often, three or four,
Mhm.
and this is exploited nicely by generally their sequences with three, it being possible to end the sequence with four. And side characters often play roles, like a member of Zidane's crew fights with us for a bit. We get to fight with Beatrix for a bit. It's really an interesting conceit. And so what the game might have been missed in individual customizability, it really gains from the fact that it constantly is playing around with the size of the party one is fighting with's mechanics.
Mhm.
And this makes one have to find new solutions. Like, well, if one gets Queena early, and I got Queena as soon as one could get them by accident, I was like, oh man, this was a lot easier than I remember. And you better figure out how to get some white magic
Mhm.
on cleanup because there are going to be a lot of segments where you do have them but don't have Garnett.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I gotta run, but this is a good stopping point, I think, as
Yes.
we arrive in Lindblom, and we'll have the hunt for next time and all. Yeah, it's a big portion to explore, and there's a lot of, again, revelations of what's going on plot wise and good stuff. So yeah,
Well,
thanks
good.
for making the time tonight.
Likewise. See ya.
Okay.